Hey, it's Kelly here. This is Get Surreal, and I'm going to be discussing the return of Twin Peaks episode 13, titled What Story Is That, Charlie? And just going to be talking about some highlights for me and also diving into some theories, some speculations I have about what might be going on in this crazy world of Twin Peaks. Okay, so let's talk Audrey first. I was so fascinated and haunted by this universe that she seems to be in episode 13. So episode 12, I was interpreting it more literally. I didn't think of it as necessarily her being in any other reality other than present day. Her marriage to Charlie seems to be a legit thing that was happening. I didn't necessarily think of them being in any other time period other than today. But you know, the more we get into it, we hear some of this dialogue that doesn't quite jive with reality, especially when you think about the scenery. It really gets you thinking. And okay, so there are some theories out there that I was reading on Reddit, and a lot of people think that Audrey's in a coma. She's been in a coma this whole time, past 25 years. She just never happened to wake up. I think that would explain several things, but I don't really buy the whole coma idea, just because there seems to be some level of contact with the outside world. When Charlie's dialing Tina, we do hear a phone ring. There seems to be some sort of knowledge of an outside world, especially with the Billy tie-in. There was a reference to Billy in early episodes. It seems to be drawing a lot of parallels with the whole truck thing. This is Isamu. Other people are speculating that this might be a lodge, either the Black Lodge or the White Lodge, that she might be trapped in there somehow, which I think is also a very fascinating idea. But I'm not really buying that either, for the same reasons that I don't think she's necessarily in a coma still. There's also this idea that Charlie could be her therapist, and maybe they're in some sort of role play. When you think about let's see, Ben Horn back in, let's see, season 2, and he was going through his whole therapeutic thing, being in like the war, in some sort of battle. I don't remember exactly what war he was. I guess he was in the Revolutionary War, right? So maybe she's involved in some sort of dramatic interplay like that. I think a lot of people were going in that direction, especially since Charlie's dialogue seems to be almost like the way you would talk to a child when you're interacting with them, when you're like imagining some sort of world with them. You kind of talk in that overacting, okay, I'm playing along, wink every now and then type of a thing. He seemed to really inherit that type of tone. So I think that is a very interesting idea too. It would explain a lot. It still doesn't really make sense when you think about the way that he's interacting with her. You know, she starts to get a little, when she gets emotional, he's like, you know, I would think that you weren't on drugs if I, you know, didn't know any better. And that's not really something that you would say to your patient. You also wouldn't probably tell them, like, this is existentialism 101, when you would expect that from them anyway. When that is their state of mind that you were trying to get them to work through. You wouldn't have this type of accusatory, almost condescending tone with them. So I don't think he's necessarily her therapist. For a while I was thinking maybe she has amnesia. Maybe that's why she was talking about Ghostwood in the way she was, about not being herself. And there was potentially some sort of tie-in with an older time that she felt comfortable in, and maybe he is her husband, but he's putting her in a place where she feels maybe some sort of warmth, familiarity in terms of the setting. But I don't think that really makes sense either when you think about like the drug comment, for example. If she was really in a fragile state of mind, he was aware of it, he probably would not be using this type of tone with her. So what I'm really starting to think is that it literally is in the 60s. So one hint that clued me into this possibility was you have the rotary phone, you also have like a touchpad phone that we see in episode 13 beside Charlie when he's sitting down. And the 60s was a time when you would likely have both in your home. I mean, I guess that would continue through the 70s, 80s, 90s, but when you take that in consideration with the other types of decor, the books, their attire, you think about her dress, her coat, you think about Charlie's like brown plaid, very, very common in the 60s, that old-fashioned radio they had, the Rolodex, no evidence of computers, anything like that. They didn't have a TV that we knew of. So yeah, the whole, I couldn't think of anything modern that really seemed like it was part of their environment. So they were even using dialogue where Audrey was saying dreams harpen realities sometimes, and when Charlie was saying don't be sore on me, that seemed like an old-fashioned way of talking. If you look at the Twin Peaks wiki, you'll see that the Roadhouse was built in the 50s, so it would have been around during this time if we're thinking about the 60s. So one thing that I was really starting to chew on, and this is a wild guess, but let's say they are in the 60s, but there's some sort of parallel universe happening where they are able to tune into the reality of today. So there's a fold in time, so to speak, that's happening. Maybe Audrey in this reality did pass away. So she was in a coma, eventually passed away. But there's this Audrey that exists in this other reality, and she's able to tune into today. She's maybe losing part of herself in the process, which is why she makes these comments like, I don't feel like myself, why she feels so mentally conflicted, confused, frustrated, because she is losing that sense of self. And that could be why Charlie's like, I'm not really getting it. Now, how they ended up together, I think that's still a mystery. I mean, all of it's a mystery, right? We don't really know anything yet for sure. But yeah, that's just a speculation that I had. One thing I thought was kind of curious was, okay, so Audrey's walking by very briefly this door, and there's like a coat hanger with a coat beside it, and this is right before she sits down in episode 13. It seems like this door to the outside has like a reddish hue beneath it, which obviously makes you think lodge potentially. Yeah, I don't know if it has anything to do with anything. Maybe it was just the set, how it tended to be lit, but that would be pretty wild if it was in relation to the lodge. But I'm more inclined to think that they would be able to walk outside. This is a time where Audrey is talking about she wants protection. When I rewatched the scene from episode 12, it was like she was asking for Charlie to come out with her to be her companion and to protect her, which is something that Audrey in this reality, or this other Twin Peaks reality that exists today, I just don't really see her wanting that type of protection from somebody. I thought it was also curious that she made she asked, at first I thought she was saying, is this ghost wood? And then I think she was actually saying it's like ghost wood. So ghost wood refers to, of course, the national forest. It doesn't necessarily refer to a particular time, but I thought it was also interesting that Charlie made this comment of, let's see, how did he phrase it? He was like, if we can go out and go looking for Billy, but there are like thousands of miles of woods. And if they were just like in a regular neighborhood in Twin Peaks or, you know, wherever they are. Like, why is this mention of like having to navigate these woods? Why did he mention that there's this new moon and it's going to be so dark outside and we might not be able to find him if, you know, they're just going to go to the roadhouse anyway. And if he's missing, why would he be hanging out at the roadhouse anyway? You know, that's a pretty public place, pretty high profile. So I'm not sure why they were so set, or Audrey was so set on going to the roadhouse in the first place. But anyway, lots of weird stuff going on there. When he had the line of, do you want me to end your story too? I don't know if I'm quoting that exactly, but that was the gist of it. That was incredibly creepy. That really gets you thinking. And the idea of a parallel universe may account for that in some sense. Like he's going to potentially, maybe he has the power to end her time in one place and reignite it in another. Who knows? Okay, so one other thing that gave me maybe an indication that this is related to the 60s is we have a couple other references to the 60s in this episode. So we see Sarah Palmer, she's watching the boxing match, or, you know, watching it is probably a strong word here. She has it on in the background while she's drinking her Bloody Mary and smoking, and we see and hear the loop of round one. Although toward the end, this is when she gets up the second time, the repetition of round one is not identical to the rest. And so it's hard to tell if this electricity is causing some sort of glitch and that's all it is. But it's like one of the lines was skipped and there seemed to be a bigger pause and the cheering didn't seem to be quite the same. So yeah, that got me wondering too about the slippage into I don't know if slippage is a word, slipping into a parallel reality, perhaps momentarily, and then slipping back into today. Okay, so there was that reference to the 60s. I don't know if this boxing match was necessarily in the 60s, but it sure looked like it. And then at the end, we have Renee. She's gazing at James as he sings Just You and I. And by the way, this cracked me up so much. I loved it because that was such an awkward scene in, I think it was season 2. Yeah. And it's like somebody was squeezing his balls when he was singing it the first time, and it still feels that way today. Although I think James of today is a pretty lovable guy. I kind of just want to give him a hug. And yeah, it was cool that he was playing at the Roadhouse. It's like the Roadhouse. You have 9 Inch Nails one week, you have James Hurley the next week, you got Chromatics coming in a couple times in a month. This has really turned into a hell of a spot for performance art. Okay, so back to Renee. She had a tattoo that had some numbers on it that appeared to be a date of some sort, the way the numbers were organized. And I believe it was 7/6/61, so indicating July 6th, 1961. So is there a connection maybe between this date, the date of the boxing match, and the reality that Audrey and Charlie are in right now? Maybe just a coincidence. Okay, while we're speaking of dates, another thing I was reflecting on was this whole concept of 25 years between events. So in episode 8, we saw the atomic bomb. It was in 1945. And if you think about it, 25 years later, Laura Palmer would have been conceived. So yeah, according to Twin Peaks lore, she was born in 1971. So that would have meant July of 1971, which meant she would have been conceived in 1970. And that would have been exactly 25 years after 1945. And so then 25 years after her death, this new stuff is happening. There's potentially a rebirth of Laura Palmer in some form or another. So yeah, it was hard not to think about that parallel and what it could mean for today, because we've had this implication that Laura is the one, that she is going to play some sort of savior role in this crumbling world of Twin Peaks today. And we saw her maybe exiting the Black Lodge or the Black Lodge waiting room, and maybe coming back into this reality. So I'm really curious to see where that goes. Another thing I noted at the end, before the end credits roll, when Ed is staring out, watching the cars pass, there's this American flag like sticker or decal or something that's next to him. It's like on the second drawer shelf, whatever's next to him there. And it comes back to him. We don't see that anymore. Then shows the sticker again. That might have some relation to the American flag that Dougie Coop saw a few episodes ago. Maybe not, but it seemed like that was potentially a deliberate continuity thing, kind of like we've seen in the Double R and in other instances. So yeah, I watched that back a couple times and I was like, yeah, it definitely seems like it's missing there. This episode had so many delicious bits. So the character Anthony, his performance was, I thought, amazing. I loved his face when the Mitchum brothers and Dougie Coop come in their Congo line with the ladies, and he's like, what the hell is going on? And he hides behind his desk. His redemption in this episode I thought was pretty great. I did not expect it at all. The stuff on his back was kind of weird. I don't know if that was like, first I thought it was sugar, then I was like, did somehow the poison manifest on his back, or is that just really bad dandruff? I have no idea. But anyway, it enticed Dougie to give him a pseudo massage, and then it caused Anthony to break down, which all worked out for Dougie, didn't it? Yeah, that jungle gym that Sunny Jim gets is pretty wild, right? It's really cool, extravagant, but there's an eeriness to it, like with the blinking lights, the spotlight, the music. It seems to have this theatrical element to it that just seems super bizarre and out of place, but I loved it. And I would have loved that as a kid too. Okay. A lot of other great stuff, but I think that wraps up the gist of what I wanted to cover for now. So can't wait for the next episode. Have a good day or night, wherever you are, whatever time it is, and thank you for watching.